Hi, Caroline. My sound work. Can you go one more time?
Yeah, are we ready to get going?
I am. Jason, are you here? All right, not here, Jason. I'll go ahead and kick us off. So thanks everyone for joining the Byrne Jag and CESF breakout session. I'll start off just by telling you who's on the line from our side. Jason Wimmer is the Director of Grant Management. He should be on the call. Keith Bugner is a grant who's actually available today. My name is Kevin Farrell. I am a grant administrator, and Clarissa Moore is also a grant administrator that's on the line. We're going to work through this presentation, and if you would, put questions in the chat box, just like we did earlier, and we will start with that. Clarissa, when you're ready.
Hello, everyone. My name is Clarissa. I'm one of the grants managers for the North Carolina Governor's Crime Commission. Today's presentation will be on Byrne Jag and Coronavirus Emergency Supplemental Funding, CESF, grant process. We ask that you hold all questions until the end. Agenda breakdown. Grant enterprise management, grant opening process, adjustments, reimbursement, reporting, and questions. Grant Enterprise Management. Grant Enterprise Management is the online portal where you will be using to administer your GCC grant. This system allows you to track your status of your grant. This is where you will upload documentation and make requests to your grants manager. Most of your work will be accessed through the menu on the left-hand side of the GEMS. This is where you will find your notice of grant implementation, adjustments, reimbursement, request section. There will also be sections to enter your grant reporting as well. If you need technical assistance in using GEMS, please contact your grants manager. Grant opening process. Once your signed grant package is returned to the North Carolina Governor's Crime Commission, your grants manager will start the opening process. This includes checking for required documentation and ensuring that your organization roles are assigned. You will be required to submit an implementation plan as well. This is a visual of the GCC Grant Award Checklist. A list of required documentations have been included into your grants package along with modification letters. These are required before we can open the project in GEMS. A grants manager will review the required documents by the checklist provided. Signatures on each document will be reviewed as well. There are also organization policies that are required for all GCC projects. Procurement and purchasing. Please note, if your policy is vague, we will default and use a North Carolina purchasing policy. Conflict of interest. How do you handle actual or implied conflict of interest? Whistleblower. How do you handle those who come forth with information on violations? Unlawful discrimination. How do you handle discrimination complaints? There are specific policies that we look at with the Byrne Jag projects based on what is being purchased. Examples: firearms, the use of force, tasers and non-lethal arms, usage policy, body cameras, usage and file maintenance. Organizational roles. Remember, It is important that your organizational roles be assigned. These 3 are required and must be organizational staff. Each project can only have one of these roles. There can be multiple of these roles. Project director can also serve as an organization administrator. Please note, those who are not staff members who need access to the projects and gems must be assigned as a project editor. During the course of your project, you may need to make updates and changes to your organizational roles. These updates require prior notice to GCC. Please send a request on an organizational letterhead to your grants manager. Once approved, your contact must obtain an NCID and request the organizational roles in GEMS. Then the organizational administrator must approve and assign these new contacts. Your grants manager can assist you with this process. This is a visual of what the request page looks like in GEMS. Notice of grant implementation. The last part of the grant's opening process is for you to complete the notice of implementation. This must be done before you can request any adjustments and reimbursements. You will be notified that it is time to complete this via an introductory email from your grants manager. The notice of grants implementation is a short narrative of how grants fund will be implemented. It explains the steps your organization will take to ensure that the project is administered according to the federal and state regulations. Please be sure to include details on all procurement, documentation, and financial reporting. Grant adjustments. Once the grant is open and your notice of grant implementation is approved, you can start submitting adjustments and reimbursements to GCC. Adjustments are changes to certain portions of terms and conditions previously issued in your grant agreement. These must be submitted via GEMS, our online portal, prior to 60 days before the grant end date. Grant adjustments. There are 2 types of grant adjustments. Non-budgetary. This includes grant period adjustments, changes, updates to your project. Budgetary adjustments. These are common for the Byrne Jag and the CESF projects because there are often changes to cost of supplies and equipment. In a budget adjustment, you can update, add, or delete budgeted items, make changes to quantities and unit cost.
Grant adjustment, also reimbursements. When Byrne Jag and CESF grants are submitting grant adjustments, for adjustments, we ask a couple things. Overestimate costs where possible. It's better to overestimate the cost than have to budget in to adjust the budget when your price comes in. Jason said my sound is spotty. Just want to make sure I'm okay.
Kevin, we can hear you, but you're fading in and out a little bit. So we hear, we miss a couple words. So just wanted to let you know that.
Okay, is this better? I'll get closer to the microphone.
I think that's helping.
That's better, Kevin.
Okay. Lean in. You'll have to see me close to the machine. We often get questions when folks are adding new line items to their budget. Should it be an equipment or supply? And we'll ask first to follow your policy. GCC has a set of policies that are kind of a floor level. And for this, the floor level is if the purchase is more than $5,000, it should be set up as equipment. But for the financial officers in the room may understand that that's not always the case for your organization. So we'd ask that you look to your policy first for what should be equipment versus what should be supplies. Next, use generic budget line item names as often as possible. When using specific models or brands, you may get limited. An example I'll use here is gas masks or respirators. If you put an exact model number in, and then when the time of purchase occurs, you purchase a different model, you have to go in and adjust that. So we ask that you use generic budget line names. And last, we ask that you mirror quotes and invoices as closely as possible. And note that quantities should match. So if you're buying 6, I'll use respirators again. If you're buying 6 respirators each, put 6 at 50 instead of putting 1 at 350. Also, when you submit an adjustment, you have to provide details and a justification, and we make sure that those are in line with your project scope. If you have a question that make sure that what you're requesting is in the project scope. And the last bullet here is about requesting funds, more funds than you have available. If you do that without letting us know, it'll cause the project to be out of balance. The main point here is to have a discussion with the administrator before that request. There's a process we need to follow to see if additional funds are available and to get that approved. So next I'll talk about reimbursements, which is probably the big thing everyone wants to talk about. Reimbursement provided after project expenses are incurred. So note that the expense is incurred and been paid for, and note that the expense is included in your project budget, your approved budget. Requests for documentations are submitted via GEMS. Clarissa talked about GEMS earlier. You will become a pro at using GEMS, but feel free to contact us for technical assistance. We're also pros at using GEMS, and we can walk you through how to submit these requests. And just know that we review everything that you put in there, and that payments for these reimbursements are dispersed on a set schedule. And now that is the following Tuesday. It's an example of when those are dispersed now. So getting specific about reimbursements. The first bullet we have here is submit by the end of the month following your transaction. That was talked about a lot during the opening session this morning. And for salaries, stuff like that aren't in these equipment grants, it's very important that they submit them the month after they happen. And this may be a change for some of the equipment grants, but we want you guys to follow that as well. Reimburse as you go. Leave some or reimburse it that next month. Get your request in the following month. I know some folks have waited until the end to do one large reimbursement instead of several small reimbursements, but we would rather you reimburse as you go. And there are several things there. If you're reimbursed, that transaction is more recent in your mind and in your memory, so you can go back and find things easier. Another reason is we look at grant utilization. So if we wait, and that's just how much money has been spent over time. And if we wait until the end of the grant period to spend all the money, it makes it look like the grant's not being utilized throughout the project period. So we just ask that you reimburse as you go, instead of waiting until the end to do one large reimbursement. Next bullet there is to think of a reimbursement as an investigation. The documents that are proving several things to us. They're proving that you are following the purchasing policy that you said you were going to follow. It proves that you actually purchased an item. It proves that you received the item, and it proves that you're putting the equipment into use. Site visit this morning, and we do not do site visits for JAG grants. And this documentation is a way of helping us put our eyes on the process and the products or equipment that you're. So you have an investigation and put the effort into it that you would put into an investigation. Last thing here, all submissions should be in PDF format. That's just a more secure way of providing a document to us than a Word document. It can't be edited. We just ask that everything be in a PDF format. A little about documentation that we're looking for now. And I'll start with photos. This is another example of helping us put our eyes on the equipment that you've purchased. One bit of advice I would give you is take photos as you receive items. Don't wait until the cameras are on the road, cars, to try to take these photos. There's two examples of photos there. The one on the left is a body camera, and the thing I'll point out there is that the serial number is very visible and very easy for us to see. The example on the right is a camera package, and the nice thing about that photo is that everything is included. You know, it's the lens, it's the strap, it's the documentation. So we just ask that you and both of these pictures are very clear, very easy to see. We ask that you keep that in mind as you're taking photos. Next, I'll talk about quotes or sole source. This is another example where GCC sets a threshold, and our threshold is $10,000 and above. But your $10,000 purchases and above would require 3 bids or quotes. Your policy may be different than that. Your policy may state that we're looking to you to follow your policy first, especially if it's more stringent than ours. But our policy is 10,000 and above, requires 3 informal quotes or a sole source request. One thing to note is that split procurement is not allowed. You split a purchase up into smaller purchases in order to miss this 10,000 threshold or to come in below it. That's not allowed. We're going to look at the total purchase to see if the total purchase with that vendor is over 10,000. We'll talk a little bit about sole source requests. They need to be a per request. There are 3 reasons we give for them. A service provider is continuing services already engaged. The second is advertising and research revealed that no other service providers were available, and for details that you made an effort to look for that. And third is another, so you can fill in there. And an example of another would be we're following the state contract. We're following state procurement, and there's a state contract with this vendor. Just a note that if you could send the sole source request form to us, found website, GCC website, or contact us and we can email it to you. Once it's sent to us, we'll get it approved, work to make sure it's okay, and then we'll send the approved version back to you, and that's what you attach as a PDF with your reimbursement submission. I'll talk about is invoices and proof of payments. Invoice from the vendor showing the date the transaction occurred, showing the item, showing the amounts. Just note that quotes and order acknowledgments are not invoices. We're looking at the actual vendor invoice. Earlier in the session this morning, but if you could highlight purchases that are included in the reimbursement request. So if there are several purchases on an invoice and only some of them are being reimbursed, be sure to highlight those or just those so that we know that they are involved in this grant. Another thing I'll say about invoices that's not on the screen is you can add notes to the invoice to tell us what it is. I've seen examples of uniforms where you guys call it a traffic vest, but the invoice is like a model number, GCR extra large. you can write on there, hey, this is our 3 traffic vests. So just make sure all invoices are included. Next is proof of payment, was also talked about earlier today. A process check or a canceled check. Make sure you show us both sides. We can see that it was endorsed and it's canceled on the other side. Another example, bank statements can be used as proof of payments, showing that check number 123 was actually cleared. The third is a $0 invoice from the vendor, and an invoice that has a on it. We're looking for an invoice that bottom shows a $0 balance due. And just to note that check vouchers are not really examples of proof of payment. Check vouchers are very helpful when you're paying multiple invoices, and you can show us on the check voucher that these 6 invoices were covered by this payment. But a check voucher doesn't show us that the payment was processed or the check. So we ask that you include process checks, not check vouchers. Next documentation I'll is vendor checks. And debarment check is making sure the vendor you've chosen is not on a federal or state list of barred vendors that the federal government or state government says we should not do business with. Notes here are to check before you make the purchase. Last thing we want to do, request because you use a barred vendor. So check before you make the purchase. And there are 2 types of debarment checks, the federal and the state. The federal debarment check is done on the SAM website, sam.gov. It does not have to be registered with the SAM.gov. They don't have to have a registration, but we need to see that they are not in a debarred state. And the state list is maintained by the Department of Administration, and it is just an Excel spreadsheet that lists all the barred vendors for the state of North Carolina. And we check sure that your vendor is not on there. So just provide us documentation that says vendor 123, vendor XYZ is not on this list, the vendor that you're working with. Next thing I'll talk about is property control documentation or requirement that we have property control documentation. We're looking for items with serial numbers or asset tags. The property control document does a couple things for us. It helps us. One, I'll go back to the site visit. That instead of me going out and looking, this is what can show me equipment purchase, the serial numbers. But it also talks about how it's being used. There's a section there for who is it assigned to. So we're making sure that this equipment is assigned and in use for the project that we're working on. So anything with serial numbers, anything that your county or city or town puts an asset tag on, we need to see property control for that. Other things that you would want to do property control documents for are items that are susceptible to repurposing. So the example I use here is networking equipment. Networking equipment may be a $100 purchase or $150 purchase, but we want to that it's tied to your project so that someone else doesn't come along and try to use it and try to repurpose it for another project. The equipment was purchased for this approved Governor's Crime Commission project, and we need to document that and make sure that's how it's used. GCC a property control record and application, which we refer to as the property control log. If you have something that your town or county uses that's different, check with your grant administrator to make sure it will suffice for what we're looking for. We can take that in lieu of the GCC form, but just work with us to make sure. One requirement that is a federal requirement is that it must be signed. So we look for a signature on these, and again, we prefer them in PDF format. So that's really all the discussion about documentation. Just what I would add about your grant administrator will look through it, will dig through the invoice and go into the details. If you would, make sure you're available the days after you put your submission in. We may have to come back to you with a question, or we may have to send it back to you in a state modifications required. we didn't see your debarment checks, please add those, or we couldn't find the proof of payment, please add those. So just be available for us to call or to reach out to if we have some changes. So the next topic on the agenda is reporting, and we'll start with PMT reporting. It's also a federal requirement that PMT or performance reports be submitted directly to BJA in a quarterly, in a timely manner, but that's quarterly. And if you were not in the session earlier that Navin did on PMT reporting, it was called CJI reporting for criminal justice improvement. To go back and watch that one. He does a great job of walking through the BJA PMT system, the screens, showing you how to fill it out. And then the main thing to remember is that that system is not connected to GEMS. So you must store a copy of your form and then upload that over into GEMS. The other thing to remember, and Navin talked about it, is that GCC must report on this back to the federal government. So we're looking to you guys to get all your stuff into us so that we can compile a summary report to send to the government. And failure to do this will put, we call it a GEMS hold, that you wouldn't be able to submit a reimbursement or an adjustment because there's a system hold on your organization because of this reporting. And here's a table just showing reporting dates. Navin talked about 10th of the month following the reporting period. So the top line there, January through March, is the reporting period. So April 10th is when we need your PMT report submitted. And then we have a due date of April 30th to get that compiled summary report. And then the GEMS hold, which I mentioned, would start on May 1st if you did not have it in. And the same goes for the other reporting periods, April to June, July to September, and October to December. The next report is an annual progress report. And this is a GCC report that is due annually on September 30th, and that's coming up soon. It's coming up this month. For those of you that have a open project going on now, we're looking for these in the next couple of weeks. They must be completed in GEM. There's a screenshot there of kind of what it looks like when you log in. It shows your period. This one is October 1st, 9 through September 30th, 20. And you'll walk through the tabs, that objective tab you provide, this is how we're meeting our objective activities. These are the activities that occurred. And then there's a place for comments. And this is where we're looking for quantitative things that results from your project. So we're looking for those annually September 30th, and it may be that your grant has just started, and it's perfectly okay to say this is where we are. We haven't purchased items yet. We're not measuring stuff yet, but they are due September 30th annually each year. So I think we're to the end, and before we take questions, I just want to say thanks for taking time to be here today. Thank you for what you guys do, and be safe out there, and let us know if you have any questions.
Okay, everybody. So in the chat, you can post questions if you do have them for Kevin or for Clarissa. While we may be receiving some questions in as people post, I do have a couple of announcements that I wanted to make. Just keep in mind that all of our sessions are being recorded. And so you can go back and watch the sessions on the GCC website. You can download them and watch them there. We'll also post question and answers to our chat logs. So you'll be able to find information there if you missed any of the questions that came up in earlier chats. And you're going to be receiving more information on our LMS or learning management system and how to go about accessing trainings in addition through that. Kevin and Clarissa, it looks like we're starting to receive a question. We have one here that is PMT reports are not currently required in GEMS for this grant. Are PMT reports now for 2020 CESF funds? I'm not sure I understand the PMT report not being required currently in GEMS for the grant, but because they are required for Byrne JAG, if we're speaking only to CESF funds, then you still are required to submit same reports into the GEMS system. We've
So
got
there's a follow-up to that question that says there's no link in GEMS for the PMT reports. First, if Navin's on the line, I'll ask Navin, are PMT reports required for CSF? I think the answer is yes. And if so, it may be a JA PMT issue where you need to reach out to their help desk to make sure this project is loaded in their system.
So if you have other questions, feel free to send them into the chat. I know we're standing between everybody and lunch, but did want to allow a few extra minutes just in case somebody has a question that they would like to get answered and didn't get answered. All right, going once, twice. Guys, we'll give you back a little bit of your time here in the afternoon. Wanted to thank everybody for participating again in today's workshop, and we wish you all the best as you continue to provide services that benefit the citizens of North Carolina. Everybody be safe. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us for our Grants Award workshop.